In the remote village of Eldridge, a pervasive sense of unease had settled over the residents. Nestled deep within a dense, ancient forest, the village was isolated from the outside world. The gnarled trees seemed to whisper secrets when the wind blew, and the nights were darker than ink, save for the pale light of the moon that cast eerie shadows. The horror began one cold, foggy night when an old woman named Alara vanished. Alara was known for her eccentricity, always muttering about the Hollow One, an entity she claimed lived beneath the village. Most dismissed her ramblings as the delusions of a lonely, old mind, but when her blood-curdling screams pierced the night air, every villager was jolted awake. They found her home empty, the door hanging off its hinges, and strange, indecipherable symbols carved into the floorboards. Panic swept through Eldridge like wildfire. The villagers, once dismissive of Alara's tales, now spoke of the Hollow One in hushed, fearful tones. According to legend, it was a being that lived in a labyrinth of tunnels beneath the village, feeding on the fear and despair of the living. It could take any form it desired, manipulating shadows and mimicking voices to lure its victims into its lair. Days turned into weeks, and the village was gripped by an ever-growing dread. More people disappeared, always at night, always without a trace. The villagers took to barricading their doors and windows, but it did little to ease their fears. They began to notice things out of place. A child's toy moved to the opposite side of a room, footprints in the dust where no one had walked, whispers that seemed to come from the walls themselves. One evening, the village council gathered in the town hall to discuss their plight. Old books were brought out, and the dusty tomes spoke of ancient rituals and forgotten gods. Amid the desperate discussion, a young man named Thomas spoke up. He had found an old journal in the library, written by an ancestor of Alara. It detailed the creation of the Hollow One, a creature born from the collective fear and guilt of the villagers who had once committed an unspeakable atrocity, sacrificing outsiders to ensure their own survival during a harsh winter. The journal mentioned a ritual to banish the Hollow One, but it required a sacrifice. Someone had to willingly descend into the tunnels and face the entity. Thomas, driven by the desire to save his friends and family, volunteered. Armed with a lantern and the old journal, he ventured into the darkness below. The air grew colder as Thomas descended, the flickering light casting grotesque shadows on the damp walls. The tunnels seemed to go on forever, twisting and turning in a maddening labyrinth. He could hear faint whispers, indistinguishable but growing louder, more insistent. His heart pounded in his chest, each beat echoing in the oppressive silence. Finally, he reached a cavern deep within the earth. The walls were lined with the same strange symbols found in Alara's home. In the center of the cavern stood a figure, shrouded in darkness, its form shifting and undulating like smoke. It had no face, yet Thomas could feel its eyes upon him, piercing and cold. Thomas began the ritual, chanting the ancient words inscribed in the journal. The Hollow One writhed and twisted, its form becoming more unstable. The whispers grew into a cacophony of screams and cries, as if all the souls it had devoured were calling out in torment. As Thomas reached the final verse, the lantern flickered and died, plunging him into darkness. The ground trembled, and a blinding light erupted from the symbols, enveloping the cavern. The screams reached a fever pitch and then abruptly ceased, leaving a deafening silence. When the villagers finally found Thomas, he was lying at the entrance of the tunnel, unconscious but alive. The Hollow One was gone, the curse lifted. Eldridge was free, but at a great cost. Thomas never spoke of what he saw in that cavern, and his hair had turned stark white overnight. The villagers rebuilt, but the memory of the terror lingered. Years passed, and Eldridge became a ghost town, the fear and guilt of its past too heavy a burden to bear. The forest reclaimed the land, and the village was forgotten by the world. But on certain nights, when the moon was full and the wind whispered through the ancient trees, one could still hear faint whispers and see shadows moving in the darkness, as if the Hollow One's presence had never truly left. Decades later, a team of urban explorers, drawn by tales of the haunted village, ventured into Eldridge. Among them was Claire, a historian with a keen interest in local legends. As the group navigated the overgrown paths and crumbling structures, Claire felt an inexplicable pull toward the remnants of Alara's home. The explorers set up camp in the village square as dusk fell, and Claire, unable to shake her curiosity, decided to explore Alara's home alone. She found the old symbols still etched into the floorboards, now covered in a thick layer of dust. As she traced them with her fingers, she felt a sudden chill, and the whispers began anew, faint but unmistakable. Back at the camp, the others grew uneasy. They heard Claire's screams echoing through the village and rushed to her aid, only to find her standing in a trance, her eyes wide with terror. She spoke in a voice not her own, repeating the words of the ancient ritual Thomas had once recited. The ground beneath them trembled, and the symbols began to glow with an otherworldly light. Before their eyes, the shadows coalesced into a form both familiar and horrifying. The Hollow One had returned, drawn back by the lingering guilt and fear etched into the very fabric of the village. The explorers tried to flee, but the entity's reach was swift and merciless, consuming them one by one. Claire, now possessed by the spirit of Alara, revealed the truth. The ritual Thomas had performed had never truly banished the Hollow One. It had merely imprisoned it, waiting for the right moment to break free. The entity fed on the explorers' fear, growing stronger with each passing moment. In a final, desperate act, Claire managed to regain control long enough to scribble a warning in her notebook before succumbing to the darkness. Her last words were a plea for forgiveness, a hope that someone might one day find the courage to end the cycle. Years later, the notebook was discovered by a young girl named Lily, a descendant of the original villagers. Determined to free her ancestors from their torment, she studied the ancient texts and prepared herself for the ultimate sacrifice. With the knowledge passed down through generations and the courage born of love and desperation, Lily ventured into the depths of the earth, determined to face the Hollow One and put an end to its reign of terror once and for all. As she descended into the darkness, the whispers grew louder and the shadows closed in. The fate of Eldridge rested on her shoulders, and she knew that failure was not an option. The Hollow One awaited, and this time, it would either be banished forever or claim another soul to feed its insatiable hunger.